欢迎收听文言文，我是本集代班主持人 Daniel。目前在华文教育是负责密涅瓦高中课程 Minerva Baccalaureate 这个项目的规划与推动。今天我们非常荣幸邀请到密涅瓦大学的教务长 Patrice McMahon 教授来到节目中，和大家分享密涅瓦大学的教育模式与课程特色。此外，我们也会请教务长和我们分享密涅瓦大学的招生与选才理念，以及他们是如何看待潜在学生的特质、能力与未来潜力。我相信这也是许多家长听众很关心的一个题目。Welcome to today's episode of the Huawei Podcast. My name is Daniel Chan. I am the Program Director of Minerva Baccalaureate at Huawei Global Institute.Today, we are honored to welcome Provost Patrice McMahon from Minerva University. Our conversation with Provost McMahon today is especially meaningful for Huawei. As we prepare to adopt the Minerva Baccalaureate in our high school program, many ideas connected to Minerva's broader educational philosophy, including active learning, habits of mind, learning outcomes, knowledge transfer,and problem-solving competencies are becoming increasingly important to our own school community. Today, we will explore Minerva's educational model, its undergraduate and professional programs, as well as the relevance of this learning in the era of the AI. We will also have an opportunity to hear from Provost McMahon as both an academic leader and a parent. So, without further ado,Let's delve into today's conversation. Welcome to Huawei Podcast, Patrice.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I'm so excited to be here again and to see your beautiful school. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. So to begin, could you introduce yourself to our audience and briefly share your journey into Minerva University? And maybe you can share a little bit about what first drew you to its educational model.Sure.
I've actually only been the provost for just 1 year. I'm coming on my first year, ending my first year at Minerva. But I've known about Minerva for about a decade. Long before this provost role, my connection actually began with my daughter, who was a student at Minerva and graduated in the class of 2020. So I've had a long time to observe the model from the outside and,you know what? A lot of things drew me into the Minerva model. I have been in higher education for 25 years in a traditional setting in a R1 research university in the United States. And I have to tell you, Daniel, I was shocked by the transformation that I saw in my own daughter. She did start off at a traditional university and easily got bored at the university and wanted to transfer to Minerva, which was a challenge for me. But within a semester, I saw such a dramatic change in her. She was curious, she was passionate, and the way that she saw the world was really different. And so initially, of course, I thought it was just with my daughter, but then I met other Minervans and I realized that Minerva really is a place that doesn't kill curiosity, but it cultivates it and encourages students to be curious and to be passionate. And it also helped them think about the world in a different way. And at Minerva, we teach students about systems and how systems operate. So very quickly, I saw that my daughter had kind of this, a different perspective on the world and on learning. And again, I was drawn into this because I have been in higher education I had been in higher education for over 20 years at the time. And I knew that higher education needed to change, and I didn't quite know how to do it myself. And so in my role now as the Chief Academic Officer, I'm always wearing the hat of a parent too, and knowing that we have to constantly be innovating and encouraging students and making sure that we put student learning first. And that's really what drew me to Minerva. It is not faculty-centered, it is not teacher-centered, it is student-centered. That is our focus first and last every day.
Wonderful. I really appreciate your sharing of your experience as a parent of a former Minerva University student. And thank you also for sharing your daughter's experience through her educational journey through Minerva University. Now, some of our listeners may not be as familiar with Minerva University. Could you introduce Minerva's broader ecosystem, including its various programs? And could you also explain whether there is a shared educational philosophy across these programs?
Sure. I hope I can do it briefly. I will say that we have an undergraduate program. We have an MDA program. That's a master's in decision making and applied analytics. And we have a new worldwide executive education program that is being generously funded by the Nippon Foundation. And I think there are a lot of similarities. And of course, there's differences. But at the core, it's based, all of our classes are co-created, meaning that many faculty work on the classes, and we start with the outcomes that we want students to learn and then work backward. And all of the courses are created around how people actually learn. So our classes are based on cognitive sciences and how the brain learns best. And that's what those principles guide our classes. And so I think in the traditional environment, what guides teaching is what faculty know and the content they want to communicate to students. That's not our starting point. Our starting point is what are the outcomes that we want students to learn? What are what we call habits of mind and foundational concepts? So that's our vocabulary. And in all of our programs, students talk about HCs. And so that's our way of communicating certain kinds of learning outcomes. And those learning outcomes can be transmitted in classes that we have both online or in person in our global immersion experiences and in student internships. So it's a way of helping our brain more easily identify what we want students to learn, and it makes it easier for students to remember things. So I always say that what I really appreciated about Minerva is it teaches people how to learn, not what to learn. So it's really a framework for learning. So I don't really think of our programs as being totally separate. I think of them as being on a continuum. So at the undergraduate level, we introduce students to our HCs and our learning outcomes. In the first year, they have a very robust curriculum, 8 classes that all of our students take. All of the classes are interdisciplinary. And then in the second year, they're introduced to other classes and interdisciplinary classes. In their third year, they start to focus more. And in their fourth year, they focus on their individual projects. So, and at the master's level, it's similarly, we operate with HCs and learning outcomes. Students learn certain kinds of skills that they may not have learned at the undergraduate level on data analytics. We really focus on certain skills around math and data analysis and decision making that we don't do at the or don't do as much at the undergraduate level. And then with WorldWise, we introduce 3 modules to mid-level executives around leadership and thinking about different leadership perspectives, around decision-making and complex decision-making again, and then persuasive communication. And those are skills. These are the skills, the human-centered skills that we think are important, I think, important for people to learn at different points in their lives and to practice. What we know is that you can't hear something, listen to something once and remember it. You certainly can't master it. And so what we do in all of our programs is make sure that students have time to practice those skills. So Daniel, I've been speaking with people in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in China about the MDA program. And across the board, everyone is like, this really changed my life. And so my follow-up question is, why? What is it? And so they speak to the HCs, and that these were concepts that they feel like in their everyday life now and in their professional environments, they're still thinking about these HCs or thinking about how to define a situation, and they go to the HC and then okay, that's the situation, that's the HC. Like, so it really works that, and for them, that was part of it. So it helps them in their professional environment. And then the community of people that they met has been very powerful. So other really smart people who are also navigating complex environments. So what we all know to be true, right, is that there's this part of the world that's about knowledge and about things that are intangible. And then there's the tangible, there's the people and the complexity and how you then take what you know and translate it. And so for them, the MDA program really provided them with a community of people to share some of their experiences, of their knowledge, of how they solved problems, and then to practice that, and then to be able to feel more confident when they went back to their professional environments. So I am just like, I've probably talked to 25 people who graduated from our MDA program, and I'm just leaving this, visit to Asia thinking we really need to, do more with our MDA program and continue to recruit these really incredible people, because we're creating all of these communities of Minervans. There's a lot in Taiwan as well, which is great. In Taipei, I met with a group. In Taichung, I met with a group. And so they continue to use the same language with Minerva. They stay in contact with faculty members, and they continue to go to these immersion kind of immersion programs that we have every spring. And we just had one in London, and we had some students come from Taiwan and Hong Kong. So they're like, I want to be back in that environment, thinking about topics that I deal with all the time, but I need kind of this refresher on the framework and want to be in a context where I can share and also learn from others. So our MDA program has been so successful, I think, in really transforming people's professional lives. And then recently, this year, we're starting a worldwide executive education program, and the interest that we've had has been tremendous. And what's really important is that it is executive education for people from different sectors. We've had a lot of people apply to the program from education, so they realize the importance of different leadership styles and what leadership looks like, and the importance of persuasive communication. Of course, we've received a lot of applications from people in business, but people working for NGOs, people in healthcare sectors. So I think this combination of programs also for Minerva allows us to elevate certain aspects of Minerva's program approach and philosophy in different ways, depending on whether it's an undergraduate, a graduate, or an executive education program. So I think at every stage, the focus is the same, helping learners develop transferable skills like critical thinking, decision-making, communication, and then having them apply in those skills in real-world contexts. So whether you're in high school or a former high school student or senior executive, the goal is to build the capacity and the tools to navigate complexity and to contribute meaningfully to the world.
That's a very comprehensive
overview. I told you it's hard to do it quickly.
No, I appreciate it. I think we will return to many of the notions in your response just now, but there's one thing that really piqued my interest, this idea of habits of mind and foundational concepts. Those are really the foundation of transferable thinking skills. Can you maybe give us an example of what that might look like in a classroom, or maybe also in real life?
Yeah, so the habits of mind are principles and practices that we use both in our classrooms and in our city-based learning. So students might have hashtag professionalism, hashtag right audience, hashtag levels of analysis. So at the beginning of all of our classes and all of our experiences, we start off by saying, here's why we're here. Here's why we're here. These are the things that we are going to be learning today or focusing on. And then we focus on what we're doing. So students understand okay, my brain needs to focus on levels of analysis today. And we're going to think of level, and I use this example because I teach international relations, and levels of analysis is a super important concept. But as people in other disciplines know, levels of analysis exist in a lot of other disciplines, right? So we start every class with, students have to come to class with pre-readings. So they come to class ready to speak. Faculty are limited, very limited in terms of how much they can speak. But we don't want students just to talk for talking's sake, right? What we want are their comments and their answers to go back to those habits of mind and those foundational concepts. So we lay the groundwork. Here's why we're here. Here's the 4 or 5 habits of mind and the HCs that we're going to focus on today. And we're not going to just you're not going to just define them. You're going to use them, and you're going to use them in different contexts. And that's the way that we assess students. So students at Minerva don't have exams, but they're assessed. They're assessed a lot, and they get a lot of grades. The grades mostly come from their participation to be able to demonstrate, again, not that they just understand what an HC is. That to us is important, but that's the first step. So what we then want to see is they're able to use that habit, to use that concept, and that over time, their ability, they have mastery of that habit, of that concept, and that becomes then a habit of mind. So they know how to implement, use that concept, and then use it in a very different environment, so that when they're somewhere else and they have a very different situation, we call this far transfer, they're able to say, oh, that's kind of a levels of analysis problem. And I can see if I just understand what level it is, I'll be able to come up with an answer. I'll be able to solve this issue. So that's how the HCs come up all the time. And sometimes with students, I'm kind of like, yeah, I get the hashtags, but they begin to then, even after their first semester, start using it as a way of kind of explaining, describing, and using it to solve problems. That's how they use the hashtags.
Wonderful. Can you maybe give us one example of how students, or based on your observation, how students have transferred some of these HCs from their academic context to a real-life context?
Yeah, I'm hearing that students do this a lot when they're doing internships, when they're doing their labs, doing research. They understand hashtag right audience. They're trying to figure out who is the audience that they're speaking with, so they know how to answer a question. And if you're talking to your boss, you're using a different language, a different way of communicating than you might with your colleague or with your parent, right? So I hear about students using hashtags all the time to be able to know how to respond to situations, how to solve problems personally as well as professionally. And I think it really helps them think about the problems and the topics that they're most interested in. They try to connect it back to those foundational concepts and those HCs.
Right. So here's a thought experiment we can do together, and this is a scenario provided by one of my colleagues. Let's brainstorm together how might a student who have trained in this kind of approach respond to this scenario differently. In today's world, it is not uncommon for people to come across unverified information or strong opinions online. If a student has been trained to use HCs, to apply HCs, right, in the analysis of these scenarios, how do you think they might respond differently, to the scenario that I just described?
Yeah, in terms of misinformation, I think that's a really good one, because I think students now are always thinking in terms of systems. So what is the broader system that this person is acting in? Where is the person coming from? What is the newspaper or article I'm reading, or the online publication? So I think in the minds of our students, things are not always so straightforward. They know it's part of a broader system, and the system might include different audiences. It might include, the sources. They might go back to who's paying for that publication? Where is the person's nationality? We are a global university. We have students, I guess, over the years from over 100 different countries. And no single country dominates. It's really hard to know like it's not students from North America. That may have been in certain classes that most of the students were coming from North America, but we have students from all over the world. So I think in a Minerva environment, they're constantly thinking, where is the information coming from? Why is the information being presented? To who is the audience for the information? They're taught a lot about different levels of power and thinking about power in different contexts. So I think they would be thinking about the power context. And we also talk a lot about the power importance of language, even using language versus using Mandarin, right? So I think that they would be, when it comes to misinformation and it comes to verifying sources, I don't know if they would always be thinking in this sophisticated way, but I'm pretty confident that in their mind, they're always knowing that there are different systems, different loops, different ways, different reasons that information is presented, and certainly different audiences. Yeah.
Thank you. So other than HCs and transferable thinking skills, another notion that Minerva is very well known for is the idea of active learning as compared to traditional lecture-based teaching. So can you help us visualize active learning in practice and share why it is so central to the Minerva model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so active learning is very important to the Minerva model. But again, it doesn't mean just students talking. That's an important part. But students have to go back to the learning outcomes, go back to the HCs that are part of that classroom environment. And what it looks like in practice is students come to class having read or watched or listened to different pre-readings, assignments. So students have what we call pre-readings, but they could be a variety of different kinds of resources. So they come to class ready to talk and ready to synthesize what they've listened to or read to be able to apply the HCs to those materials. And so it starts off with faculty members providing a very brief couple-minute overview of here's why we're here today and here's what we're going to do. And then students go from one to the next saying, you know, tell me in this reading that we had, or the two readings that we had about peace building in Ukraine. And Daniel, could you relate what you've learned about peace building in Ukraine to really two of the central concepts that we're focusing on, our HCs that we're focusing on today, which is levels of analysis and is, I'm trying to think of another HC that would be appropriate. I don't know if there is a peace building, levels of analysis and power. So talk about apply this specific example of the war in Ukraine and then incorporate and apply, integrate power and integrate levels of analysis. So then Andrew, then Daniel would speak, and then Daniel, I might say, okay, well, Andrew, now tell me what you disagree with what Daniel was saying, and then incorporate a different HC. Or maybe there's not an HC and a learning outcome that we had, identified in our coursework. Our everyday courses and everyday classes have about 30 pages of text. So every minute, by the minute, is very scripted. So, we move around very quickly in our topics. So I would say, Andrew, based on Daniel's, what he said, disagree with some of the things or something he might have said, but then I really want you to add a new HC or add an HC or a learning outcome or a concept that we didn't have this year, but maybe you learned in your class last year on complex systems. So it's really constantly trying to reiterate certain concepts, use certain concepts, and have students apply those concepts in similar places and in different places.
So it sounds like the faculty instructors also play a very important role in facilitating the learning of students in the forum environment, right?
The faculty are crucial. And for me, another thing that I was really attracted to with Minerva that was kind of sad in terms of my own situation, faculty spend a lot of time getting trained to teach Minerva classes. They get trained to use our sophisticated online platform that's called Forum, and they get regular professional development on teaching and teaching facilitation. So they do not go in the classroom saying, this is what I know. Again, I'm using topics that I'm familiar with, peace building in the Balkans, and I'm going to share with you all of my eternal wisdom. But it's always asking, very Socratic and very focused on HCs and these foundational concepts. And what they do, Daniel, that I think is so important is, I was just looking at this morning, is they provide regular grading to students, but gradings like 90% of the time, if not higher, are always accompanied by a concept. Like, I'm giving you a grade of a 5 for your use of HCs today, Daniel, and here's how you demonstrated that you really understand this concept of power and that you were really able to use this concept in a very sophisticated way, and that you were able to apply this concept in another environment. So our faculty in class are taking notes. We often have TAs who are taking notes based on student participation, and then we record our classes, and then faculty go back through and watch the class again once, if not twice, to make sure that they're giving constant feedback. Because we know also, as you know, we're all on our phones and we get dopamine, right? We know that our brain is constantly wanting feedback, and we know that students want feedback on what they're doing right and also what they're doing wrong. And so we try to say, you know, you went off course a little bit today. You didn't really talk about this HC, or you didn't talk about, you know, 3 out of the 4 HCs. And what we want to see is more of that kind of response, more of that kind of learning. Like, you have to demonstrate that. And since we know that the brain needs that to continue learning, it is not, I mean, again, we have grades, and some of them is, you know, grading on a poll, or grading on certain kinds of exercises, and grading the classes. So sometimes we have thousands of grades that students are getting, and it's a way of constantly reinforcing student learning, but also telling students this is not what we're hoping for. Because as you know, students come from different backgrounds, and some students are just not comfortable. It takes a while to start talking in class, and we want them to start talking. We don't want them to regurgitate information. We want them to be creative. We want them to be curious. We want them to question. We want them to push back on things that they disagree with. And that takes training for students as well.
I think our audience or our listeners will be interested in knowing that a lot of these ideas that you have just described are also found in Minerva Baccalaureate. So we're very excited for our students to be able to encounter these skills of learning already in secondary education. So Patrice, as mentioned earlier, Minerva University has been widely recognized for its innovative approaches to higher education. In fact, it has been ranked #1 most innovative university for many consecutive years.
4 years. 4 years, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
By URI, right? Maybe you can talk about that accreditation?
Yeah, so URI is the World University rankings for innovation.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So when people describe Minerva as innovative, what do you think we need to understand about the nature of that innovation?
Yeah, so Daniel, I guess it was in the fall, we had a professional development workshop where the beginning was, what do we mean by innovation at Minerva? And it ended up being the entire, that took up the entire professional development workshop. And we had lots of examples, but what we really wanted to be sure is that we had a similar understanding. We didn't have to all agree on it. And for me, it was really interesting because I think at the end of the day, what we decided is often people think of innovation and technology, or they think innovation and some quick fix or something really specific. And I think what we ended up saying is that at Minerva, innovation is our approach. It is our openness to learning, our openness to being wrong, and our openness to constantly trying to improve. And I will tell you, after a year at Minerva, it is exhausting. And this is so different from the last 25 years that I spent in higher education. People are constantly talking about, how did the class go today? You know, you were teaching complex systems, and so after our classes, and we do this with all of the classes that we do, is faculty get online and say, okay, you were teaching complex systems, I was teaching complex systems, did this exercise that we had, did it work? How did it come off? What did students think? What did they say? Did they go back to the HCs? So it's really being open to change and being open, and again, it's something I really appreciate, being open to being wrong and saying, okay, we didn't quite get it right, and we really hoped that students here would, you know, really learn about, you know, the scientific method, and but it didn't happen in the class, like the exercises that we were trying to use, because of course we can describe and we can explain the scientific method, but what we want is to, in the classroom, for students to be able to show us, right, and to demonstrate us. So for Minerva, it is this approach to constantly iterating, and we do that, you know, so most universities, they revise courses at the end of the semester or the end of the year. At Minerva, they're revising courses every week. And so, like, based on last week, we're going to do this differently, even though the classes are very scripted and very planned out. Scripted is the wrong word. It's very intentional. It is a very intentional model where classes, you know, the innovation comes because of what we're hearing from students, or what might work in 1 year, a year later, or even a semester later, might not work. And so innovation has to mean this openness to consistently and constantly changing. And we also do that with our global immersion. So students live in many places around the world. They start off in San Francisco. Year one is their foundational year in San Francisco. Now students for their second year travel to Japan. In the third year, they have been traveling and will travel this year to Buenos Aires. And then for their fourth year, it really depends. We've had students in Taiwan. My daughter studied in Taiwan. It was her final semester at Minerva, unfortunately, and that's when COVID happened. So she then ended up coming back to Taiwan because she really felt like she hadn't really been here long enough. So we've had students for their senior year in Berlin, Hyderabad, Taipei, and we want to continue innovating. And what we know, I know as a professor of international relations, is the center of gravity in the world is changing. American leadership is changing, and we all have to accept that. So we want to make sure that our students are ready for the world, how it looks now and how it's going to look in 5, 10, 20 years. And unlike, I think, a lot of universities based in the United States, there's an unwillingness to accept what's been happening in other countries and other places and other societies in the world. I'm not. I think, you know, this is what it's my job to make sure that my students are ready for the world. And so we try to remain open to our global rotation cities. And right now we're in discussions with some innovative universities and donors in Brazil. That's a possibility. We've had students several times in Hyderabad, and we know that India is a rising power. You know, we just can't deny the countries that are rising and how power is shifting in international relations. And so we don't want to stay like in a model where they have to be in these 4 countries for 4 years. We want to make sure that, just like we want our students to be adaptive and to respond to changes on the ground, Minerva has to adapt and respond to changes and to geopolitical realities. So this innovation that we have is incredible, It's what I think we all believe. I will tell you it's also exhausting. It is exhausting, yeah, to constantly be revising classes. I did a course on the science of learning for educators in Japan for the Tokyo municipal government and the Board of Education in Tokyo. And really, literally, right after I finished the course, I was revising it and making sure that next time I did things differently to make sure that the experience for our students, wherever they are, they could be, high school teachers in the United States or anywhere else, that we were ready to accommodate them and to make sure that we were giving them the best learning experience that we could do at Minerva. So we're really, I think for us, innovation is really connected to being student-centered and really focused on student learning wherever, however they come to Minerva.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it sounds to me that the nature of innovation that you were describing, again, is connected back to learning and students' experiences. So that kind of reinforces the fact that the design of Minerva University is very much student-centric and student-focused, right?
It really is. And again, that's, for me, gives me inspiration and purpose. It really shouldn't be about what faculty know or what faculty are interested in. Again, I use my example all the time. Like, I'm super interested in peace building in Central and Eastern Europe. How many others are, I don't know. Is that the most important thing or the most important place in the world? Probably not. So I think what's really important that I take my expertise, the things that I know about peace building or about humanitarianism, and be able to share it with students in a way that allows them to use that knowledge in a variety of other contexts around the world and in ways and in places that are important to them and their future.
So nowadays, it seems like it's impossible to talk about innovation without talking about AI. So as you know, AI has become more and more prevalent in our lives. In the age of AI, many parents and educators are asking what kinds of abilities will matter most for young people. Now, from Minerva's perspective, what human capacities become even more important as AI becomes more powerful?
We are all pretty obsessed with AI and really worried about AI, and it doesn't keep me up at night. I think there's been lots of, technology and machines that, people have worried that it's going to take over or change. I think it already has changed what we're doing at Minerva. But to answer your question directly, I think critical thinking, adaptability, collaboration, ethical decision-making, empathy, those are all skills that people have to have. And those are not skills that AI has. Like, AI can help us, can give us an answer to a question. AI cannot be empathetic and working with groups. AI is not discerning of information. So for me, it's a tool, and I'm proud to say that this year we had 2 AI fellows who have worked with all of our faculty. Our classes are not AI proof because, as you know, AI is constantly changing. What our faculty have done in conversation with faculty members throughout Minerva, in conversation with students, we have tried to narrow in on how we can make our classes AI informed. So we are changing how we assess students. We are, in some ways, going backward and moving toward more oral examinations, having students write out things in class in the moment. But what we don't want to do is spend a lot of our time trying to, discover when students are cheating, right? What we want to keep reminding students is you are a human being, and we want to motivate them to be curious and to be empathetic and caring enough to want to solve global problems. And that is something that AI can't do. AI can augment that, AI can help that, AI can assist people, but some of the things but so many of the things that for me really matter in these kind of human skills, that's not something that a machine can do. We can tell a machine to, use a, ethical lens in writing up an essay, but they can't use an ethical lens to interact and collaborate and work through a problem. Those are the skills that students, all of us still need to know, and they need to practice them. And so I think this article that was written in Forbes about startup universities, because we're smaller, because I think we're more aware of the limitations of universities, and faculty, frankly, at Minerva are very open to trying new things, because it's not about them, it's about what do our students need to be successful. And so I actually gave a talk today, and I was saying that right now our biggest problem is we're overwhelmed with information. It's constantly, we're getting bombarded with information. And what we need to do at Minerva is help students discern, right? Help them filter information so they have judgment about what is most important, what are our priorities. And these are things, again, that AI can't help people do, right? Judgment is something, ethical reasoning is something that people have to use their own brains to reflect on, and to use their own experiences, their own values, to be able to then articulate and change and influence their behavior. So again, I think it's really important that we all know how to use AI, that we have ethical approaches to using AI, that we try to find ways of using AI to collaborate more and to solve global problems. But I think fundamentally the university environment is still going to be about people learning from other people, and I think one of the things that's so important is that we need to help students think, we need to help students feel, and help students do. And again, those are not things that AI can do, right? AI really, it helps us maybe learn things and helps us think. It may help us do things, but those are things that we need to practice. And one of the things that we really, emphasize in Minerva is it's really hands-on, and students every day in different global cities around the world are thinking, feeling, and doing. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we have been talking a lot about Minerva University. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about secondary education. As you may have heard, Hua-Wen will be launching our high school program this August.
So excited.
Very excited.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. So as we prepare to adopt the Minerva Baccalaureate in our high school program, many of the ideas we have discussed today, such as active learning, habits of mind, learning outcomes, and knowledge transfer, feel highly relevant to secondary education as well. From your perspective, how do secondary education programs that emphasize active learning, knowledge transfer, and problem-solving competencies prepare students for success in higher education? Can you maybe share a few examples from the students you have observed at Minerva University?
Yes, and I can give you some examples, Daniel, recently. And I can tell you a student who has been at a high school that emphasizes active learning. I can tell immediately. And it is curiosity, questioning, and passion. And I was, 2 weeks ago, I was in Japan because our students have their second year in Tokyo. And so at the end of the semester, our students were showcasing their civic projects. So part of what they do in Tokyo is they work with community partners on specific projects that our civic partners identify. So at the end of the semester, we brought together these civic partners. We had over 200 people in the room. And a Japanese professor said to me after this, one of our Minerva students was explaining his project and what he was doing. And he was just so animated. I'm trying to think of the topic that it was on, maybe on sustainable agriculture, and was walking us through what he was doing, how he was doing it, his interactions. And anyway, this Japanese professor said to me, the passion that this young person has. And I know, having been in a traditional university, we almost, we unfortunately take a lot of students' passion away and their curiosity away because they're so focused on taking tests and rote learning and memorization. And so for me, to have this Japanese professor really acknowledge how passionate this student was and how eager he was to learn more and all of the questions and how it related to living. And he was a student who's originally from Africa, and I can't remember where he was from in Africa, but he started talking about the differences between his country and Japan and what he learned. And again, I think both this Japanese professor and I were like, yeah, this is what we want to see. And so I can see that. I could see that when I was in a traditional classroom and had students who were from a Minerva Baccalaureate program or from an IB program, students that had an opportunity to engage in their own passions and to follow things that were interesting, and also to be in an environment where they could question. I think that at Minerva, one of the things that might frustrate people who come from the outside is students will question and say, well, Daniel, you said this, but did you really mean this? And what did you mean? And so I've also had people say, your students, boy, they ask a lot of questions. And I say, yeah, they do, because they really want to know, but they're also not accustomed to being passive. And in the world that we live in right now, Daniel, I feel like the earlier the better, that we, empower students and also teach them how to be respectful, how to be professional, how to understand the culture that they're in, and to make sure that they're being culturally appropriate. That's really important. But I think that has to happen over time. So one of the challenges that I know that my own daughter faced is when she went into Minerva, she was like, wow, all of a sudden, and she had already spent a year at a traditional university, but she was largely in lecture classes and didn't have to speak up. And all of a sudden she was on and being asked questions, and the professor would come in and say, okay, let's start it, let's go. And it was 90 minutes of constant conversation, a few rests. So again, I think it's really important that we start changing the way we teach students. Really, the earlier the better, right? We don't want them to be robots, because we can create robots, right? We want them to be active listeners, active learners, and individuals who know and want to be creative, right? They want to be creative. And that's really important in the world that we live in. It's just not, and I can say this as not as an American citizen, not just following what people tell me what to do, but to make sure that I am respectfully challenging authority, situations, and can also have the confidence to be creative and not just and constructive and not just critical. I think also when students are in an active learning environment early, they don't feel like they have to lash out or just be negative and say, I don't like this, I don't want this. Well, tell us then, you've been in an environment where you've had voice, you've had agency. So what does it look like? What do you want your learning to look like? And that I actually have seen with students, from first year to fourth year at Minerva. When they're at first year, they're often, the rules are still a little confusing to them, or they don't understand the model, and they're trying to adapt, and they're working very hard. And in the fourth year, they definitely feel much more agency and want to understand kind of their next step and their role, and are willing to ask really sophisticated questions and push back on some of the things that we do in Minerva. And I will tell you that part of the innovation at Minerva is using student feedback to improve things. So again, I think these are skills that are hard to unlearn. If students have been taught to memorize, to be passive, and to be like, well, you owe me, what are you going to teach me? And I'm like, well, if you're just sitting there and not even taking notes, I suspect you're not going to learn anything from anybody. But when students go in a classroom and are told, you can and should ask questions and be passionate, and you're able to engage and have some choice over the things that you learn, if your topic is biology, there's ways that we can structure assignments and learning so that students have agency. And again, I think that the sooner the better. So congratulations on your new school. Yeah.
Right. So I know that in our high school program at Huawei, we strive to provide students with the opportunity to develop these skills so that they are prepared for higher education. So we also know that Minerva University is known for for being highly selective, even more so than Harvard University. And many families are curious about this. Beyond grades, what are some qualities or ways of thinking that immediately stand out to you in an applicant? What makes you feel this is exactly the kind of student we are looking for?
So we are looking for the same kinds of students as the faculty we hire. And we have rejected both highly qualified students and highly qualified faculty and staff who are not open-minded, right? So everyone at Minerva has to have a level of humility, but also has to be curious and motivated. Students at Minerva really have to be willing to engage with and in challenging environments. This is not an easy proposition. Students traveling around the world, even if they're in a cohort, so they're with their friends, but they're traveling every year. It is not easy. So, and the students have to be self-motivated. We don't have tests, and that may change with AI. We may find that providing some kind of tests is a better way of assessing student learning. In the past, we haven't had that. So it has to be students who are also flexible and adaptable. Things are not going to stay the same. Students say they don't want the traditional kind of lecture, and they don't want the things that have been happened for the last 20 years. But often we find that students aren't very adaptable, and they have to adapt, and they have to be resilient. This is not easy, and I would say that it's as we know, they joke in the United States about adulting 101 because students go to university, but they really are pampered, sitting in lectures, taking tests that they do multiple choice, and all of their meals are taken care of. This is in the U.S. context. So students there's a lot of hand-holding that happens at a lot of American universities, and they're coached on what to do, how to do things, and they get through, of course, and particularly at Ivy League schools with all A's, and then they get into the real world, and then they're like, wow, wait, oh my gosh, biology 101 has no relevance. What we try to do at Minerva is to make sure that our students come from a variety of backgrounds, meaning a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultures, different classes, and that they're willing to engage in these challenging courses and in these challenging environments. And again, I believe this is why our students are so successful once they graduate from Minerva. They can go anywhere, drop themselves down, and do almost anything. I think our new hashtag is belong everywhere, lead anywhere, something like this. And I truly believe that is what Minerva students can do. But coming into Minerva, I think it's just has to be a student who knows the traditional way of learning has not worked for me. And we do get, by the way, a lot of transfer students. I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say every third student I talk to has been, one of the students I've been working with recently went to a very prestigious school in Singapore, didn't like it. Another student came as a transfer student from a college in Canada. So it's often students who know themselves and say, the rote memorization doesn't work for me. I don't like sitting in a classroom and not being able to engage. Also, a line that I love students saying is, I'm interested in so many things, right? And sometimes they say, I'm sorry, but I'm interested in so many things. And I say, do not be sorry. It's so good that you're curious and interested in so many things, because actually, I don't know what the job market is going to look like in 4 years. And it looks like what we're saying to students, at least in the UX context, is you'll probably have 3 to 4 very distinctive careers. So what we need to do is provide you with foundational skills and skills that are transferable that you can use in a variety of environments. So you may start off as, working in the university environment, and then you may move to a startup, and then you may move to management in a company. And so some of those skills and the skills that you learn in college have to be transferable. And so I think that the students that we're really looking for, and the students who I think would thrive at Minerva, and I suspect at other great universities, are students who don't necessarily have all the answers, but are willing to ask the questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Those insights, I think, will be of interest to a lot of our parents, maybe who are interested in Minerva University or other institutions of, innovative institutions of higher education. So we'll close with one final question for you. So a lot of our listeners are the parents of our students. If you could leave them with one message about the future of learning, what would it be?
That's a great final question. I think the future of learning, I think there's no doubt about it. The world is changing, and it's changing very quickly. Again, born and brought up in the United States, but having lived outside the United States for much of my life, I also know that power in the world is changing in terms of countries, in terms of values. So I think in terms of learning, students really need to know themselves and know what matters to them. So I think that the purpose-driven education is really important, right? So as much as we might want to impose, this is important and you have to learn this and you have to learn that, I think the future of education has to some degree acknowledge the changes that are happening in the world, that are happening with individuals, and encourage students and encourage people to be curious and to want to solve problems, and to help them navigate this complexity and this uncertainty. And I think there's lots of different ways that universities can do this. I just did a talk and mentioned this idea of an a la carte future, where universities kind of are focusing on certain outcomes that they really think they can do, given money, given their situation, given their values. I think that's what Minerva has done. We have said we are not about research and investing in faculty research. We're invested in students and learners. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic about the future of education, but I think there's no denying the complexity that exists and the uncertainty. And I think that the future of education really has to help young people, or all people, navigate that complexity and that uncertainty. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So, I just want to reinstate my appreciation for you to join us today in our program. It has been wonderful to hear your insights, not only as an academic leader and educator, but also as a parent. So I think today's conversation gave us a lot to reflect on, especially in terms of what meaningful learning can look like in a world shaped by AI and constant change. Our conversation today has been mostly centered around secondary education and university education, but it seems like all of these core competencies will continue to be relevant throughout a person's life, right? Later on in their professional life, for example, right? And I think this really resonates with one of our founder, Dr. Shi's idea of lifelong learning. So, every one of us continues to learn and grow throughout our own life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great way to think about it. I mean, critical thinking means one thing when you're an undergraduate. It means something else when you're a professional and you've had 5 or 6 years of experience. And then when you're in an executive education program, 10 years in a leadership position, critical thinking means something different. And it also means, maybe helping people who report to you engage in critical thinking if they've never had an educational background that encouraged critical thinking. So, so I think lifelong learning is something that Minerva really embodies.
Something Minerva University and Hua-Wen education resonate, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah.
For us at Hua-Wen, this conversation is especially valuable as we prepare to bring the Minerva Baccalaureate into our high school program and continue thinking about how active learning, habits of mind, and knowledge transfer can better prepare our students for the future. Thank you again, Patrice. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us today.
Thank you, Daniel.